Hi, everyone. That work? Yeah. Yeah. So my name's Peter Addy, and I do a lot of things, but I my main area of study was salvia, and I was well, I am. Yeah, I am faculty at Yale University, and we did some salvia research there, and that not that I'm not talking tonight about salvia, but that's a real interest of mine, and that plant is a selective kappa opioid receptor agonist, which I've talked about that at some other talks. I'm on YouTube. You can see a few things about that. But what really got me interested, I was doing research on salvia and other plants, other botanical compounds with similar properties, right? And I learned about kratom, which, among other things, is a kappa opioid antagonist, opposite effect on the same system of the brain. Like right up to me. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. So, so I first learned about kratom through my research on salvia and learning about just how it works on the brain and how that might relate to addiction. And that's kind of what opened the door for me. And I've been reading about it for years since. I haven't done any research on it myself, so I've just been reading things over the years. And I'm not planning on doing any research. I'm not doing any research with this handout, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it's just been an interest of mine. And it's been in the news a lot lately. There's been a lot of press about kratom as maybe it's dangerous and it's this deadly narcotic and we need to schedule it immediately. Or maybe it's this wonder chemical that'll cure heroin addiction. And I've seen all sorts of weird claims like that online. And the truth is, in the middle between those two things. Let's see. So what do we know about kratom? So on the East Coast where I'm from, we say kratom with a soft A. Out in Portland, it seems like most people say kratom with a hard A. And then if you're in Thailand or Malaysia, it's something else entirely. So, but I'm going to say kratom. That's how I learned it. Kratom is from Southeast Asia. It was first described in the English language in 1836. Soon after, we discovered that the primary alkaloid by weight is called, again, I've been pronouncing it mitragynine. Who knows? I'm going to say mitragynine, that's what I know. And that's been used for opioid withdrawal, reducing pain, increasing energy. It's well described in Thailand and Malaysia. People use it. It's either classed similarly to or maybe a little bit better than using coca or opium to help you work, to help you cope from doing manual labor in the hot sun for 12 hours a day. It's also, apparently, it's well known in Southeast Asia that chronic kratom users, it darkens your skin. It increases pigmentation, even if you're inside all day. I've never heard that in the West. But in 1932, the first and so far only human pharmacology study was done on kratom in Southeast Asia. 80 years later, we have not duplicated it. And that's a shame. The research method back then was clearly, it's not up to today's standards, but it was shown to have a biphasic effect. If you take a little bit, it has a stimulant effect. If you take more of it, it can have a sedative effect. It can reduce pain, acute pain that they produced in the lab. And if you take too much, one of their subjects, unfortunately, was just nauseous and vomiting the whole time. And so dosage is very important. And they learned that in 1932. In the 40s, it was criminalized in Thailand. In the 50s, it's been regulated in Malaysia. I believe in Malaysia, the plant, you can grow the plant. I mean, it's native to the region. It can grow, but you just can't manufacture from it. Chronic users have been described since the 70s, and it wasn't until 1998, we first discovered mitragynine is an opioid agonist in rodents. So, what do we know about it in Southeast Asia? There's, like most things in the world, it's gendered. So men take kratom in the morning and it helps them work. If you're doing manual labor in the hot sun for 12 hours a day, you need some kratom or some coca leaves or something to chew on to get you through the day. In Thailand, the leaves are chewed. In Malaysia, you make a juice or a tea out of the leaves. And men take it in the morning to help them work. They take it at night to help them wind down or to socialize. It can also be an aphrodisiac. Women take kratom for medical reasons. So let's see here. To help treat fever, diarrhea, pain. You can make a poultice out of it for wound care. So women don't use kratom to work or for socializing. That's improper. It's used. It's a good substitute for opium and coca. Muslims can use it instead of alcohol. And let's see. I found a recipe in one of the papers. So you take fresh leaves, add it to boiling water. You reduce it to a simmer for 1 to 4 hours, and you have to stir it. Otherwise, the leaves start to burn, and that smells really bad. But then, and that's good for at least 14 days. And so that's how to make this juice packet that they sell in Malaysia. No one really knows how much kratom people use or how many people use kratom, but we see that it tends to be more popular in men than women, but that's drug use in general. We see that it's more popular among adolescents and young adults compared to older people, and again, that's just kind of true across the board. Unfortunately, that's changing a little bit. There's this new thing that all the cool kids are doing in Thailand and Malaysia. It translates to, in English, something like 4 by 100. And what that means is that you take like a sugary, like Coca-Cola, kratom, cough syrup, which is probably for the diphenhydramine, and then whatever kind of prescription drugs you can find, maybe some benzos or some antidepressants or whatever, and serve over ice. And that's the new popular drink. And that is very dangerous. Don't do that. Mixing kratom with other drugs, particularly prescription drugs, particularly other opioids, is very dangerous, and that can be a lethal combination. And that's unfortunately becoming more popular. But traditionally, it's used by adults to help them work, and it's not seen as being bad. You know, like we're all addicted to coffee here, but it helps you work. You're a more productive member of society. So it's not seen as a particularly, there isn't much of a stigma to it, even though it is illegal. So, why do people use kratom? As I mentioned, over in Southeast Asia, a lot of it is to work and then to kind of relax and come down from work, and also as a substitute or to help withdrawal from opioids, opium particularly. In the West, and there's been some research, some surveys in the US and Europe and then online, like the Vaults of Arrowwood. And we don't know where people are, but I'm just going to clump that together under the West when I talk about West versus East. So if you're online, I'll assume you're from the West, which isn't, that's maybe unfair of me, but I'm just going to clump it together. So in the West, people use kratom mainly to manage acute and chronic pain. Also for emotional and mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and insomnia, and again, to manage dependence on opioids or to help withdrawal from opioids. And you can see that there it's kind of the way people use methadone or buprenorphine or naltrexone, that you want to use that to kind of come down, and the withdrawal is less, the dependence is less debilitating, or so it's said. Amongst people who use kratom for pain, they say it's particularly beneficial for spinal pain and fibromyalgia. The reasons, so when people say, I took kratom and here's what happened to me, like on Arrowwood, right? Who knows about Arrowwood when I say that? So there's a great website, arrowwood.org. It's the information clearinghouse for documenting human use of psychoactive drugs. And one of the great things about Arrowwood is you can write a report, like I took kratom and here's what happened to me, here's how my day went. And you upload it and it's curated. You can't just put anything on there. It's curated by humans. And then and there's over 200 of these reports, and so you can kind of see patterns over time. Sometimes the people write, I'm a 35-year-old man and I weigh 180 pounds and I'm taking these other medications and I live in this country, but a lot of times they don't. But from those kinds of anonymous reports, we get the idea that people report reduced pain, reduced fatigue, anxiety, and depression, increased well-being and relaxation. But there's also a lot of negative side effects. There's a lot of detrimental effects. So we have data from that from a few different sources. There's a hospital, one of the largest hospitals in Thailand, has a poison center. And so they've recorded 40 cases of kratom poisoning over a 5-year period. And then there's also the Poison Center Network in Texas. They've been recording kratom poisonings, and then the US system as a whole. And what happens there, so if you're in the hospital and you say, oh, I'm nauseous, I'm throwing up, I'm constipated, and then the doctor says, what have you taken recently? And they say, I took kratom. Then it enters into the hospital system. In the US, that's phone calls, and that could be a phone call from a paramedic or an outpatient doctor's visit or a hospital. But people have to make those calls and have to identify the patient said that they took kratom. So it's very limited. But the idea is that the poison networks all report the same. There's a lot of similarities there. About 33 to 40% of these reports are people who have taken other drugs. Again, prescriptions, alcohol, cannabis, but other things. And in the US system, there's been over 600 of these reports. And there's a statistically significant correlation. If you take kratom in combination with another drug, you are more likely to have a severe outcome, which means hospitalization. If you take just kratom, you're more likely to have a minor outcome or a moderate outcome. But the more drugs in your system, the more likely you are to have a severe outcome. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely that's a lot. That's a high dose. I'll mention first that also when we talk about negative effects, so there's these poison centers, there's surveys and the Arrowwood reports, and in those, it's almost the same thing. People talk about a lot of nausea, vomiting, dizziness, constipation. It can actually, one of the Southeast Asian surveys, people reported it increases libido, aphrodisiac effect in men. But these kind of negative effects that people report from chronic kratom use is that it reduces your libido and it makes it harder to be intimate. So that's kind of an interesting effect, short versus long-term use maybe. Yeah. Yeah, there's been a number of rodent studies, and then back in the day I found one paper that used dogs and cats as well. That's kind of out of favor. We don't do that very often. I haven't seen a single primate study, and there was only the one human study from the 30s. And animal research compared to humans, well, we metabolize drugs differently. I mean, that's just in general, but kratom specifically, mitragynine, is metabolized through a different pathway in rodents than animals, and usually when you're doing research on rodents, you're injecting it. And humans, so far as I know, don't inject kratom or kratom alkaloids. It has been smoked. It is smoked once in a while, but that's pretty rare. It's usually taken orally, either chewing the leaves or an extract of it, that sort of thing. So for a number of reasons, what happens in mice and what happens in humans are different. And so I've read some of the literature, but I'm not really going to summarize it just because they're so different. But we have seen in rats and mice that it reduces pain. It reduces the response to acute pain. It's harder to study chronic pain in rodents, and it can reduce inflammation. And there's a point where it's unsafe, but you can overdose on water. So of course you can overdose on mitragynine, but it has a much better safety profile than morphine, which is what it's always compared to. That's the gold standard opioid is morphine. The real problem with morphine, fentanyl, anything like that, is that it's going to reduce your breathing. Respiratory depression is what makes it so deadly. And kratom, or rather mitragynine, does not cause respiratory depression. So it's got a lot of promise there. Let's see. I will say the one kind of difference that I saw between Southeast Asia and the West is that the hospital poison system in Thailand reported seven seizures that people had that apparently were attributable to kratom. I haven't seen that from the U.S. literature. Not in the same kind of literature anyway, but maybe that's, I mean, who knows where that's from, because these are hospital reports. It's hardly systematic. As far as dose, well, the kratom leaf, so these are the leaves that we're talking about. The leaf has, depending on the leaf, there might be up to 40 unique alkaloids that are in the leaves. Not every leaf has all 40 of them. The most prevalent by weight is going to be mitragynine, and that's also the one that's been studied the most, and it has the most obvious psychoactive effects. That is a partial agonist at the mu opioid receptor, and it's an antagonist at the kappa opioid receptor. So, without going into a pharmacology lecture, we have something like fentanyl or morphine, right? These are full agonists at the mu opioid receptor. That's what causes pain relief, euphoria, addiction, and also the respiratory depression. Mitragynine is a partial agonist, so it's not going to bind as strongly to those centers of the brain. So it's a much, maybe it's a more mellow effect, partial agonist. But what's really interesting, I think, is that it's a kappa antagonist. You know what else is a kappa antagonist? Naltrexone and NorBNI, which I'm not going to try to say the whole name for that, but NorBNI is a research chemical used in rodents and primates and humans. I was involved in a lab study in Spain where we gave we gave people salvia and recorded their effects, right? And then half the time we gave them NorBNI beforehand, and that blocks all of your opioid receptors. So you take NorBNI and then salvia, you have no effects. It doesn't do anything. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a research chemical. I don't think it's really used for anything outside a lab, but it's similar to naltrexone or buprenorphine in that it kind of blocks your receptors. So it's a kappa. So that's just a full antagonist across the board. NorBNI is a mu, delta, and kappa antagonist. Yeah, that's a good point. So we have, so a drug interacts with a receptor in a brain, right? And it could be a agonist or an antagonist. If it's an agonist, it connects to that receptor in the brain, and then it sends the signal along. It increases activity there. If it's an antagonist, it connects to that receptor, and then nothing else can get in, like nothing else can touch it. So the actual morphine or the salvin RNA, there's nowhere for it to bind to, so it can't have its effect. It blocks that from happening. Within agonists, you can have partial agonists, full agonists, and then inverse agonists. And going into all of that is, well, that's beyond my level. But we have full agonists where, again, the receptor is covered and no other chemicals can connect to it. So if you have LSD affects serotonin 2A, and then regular serotonin can't affect that same receptor because the LSD is in its place, right? So here we have mitragynine, where it's a mu agonist, which is kind of like morphine, but it's also a kappa antagonist, which is kind of like naltrexone. And so that's what's really interesting to not just me, but to a lot of researchers who think that this chemical, or maybe something derived from it, could be the next treatment for pain or for opioid use. Yeah. So, pharmacology isn't my area of expertise, but I used to work in a pharmacology lab, so I've picked up a few things. And we definitely have three kinds of opioid receptors. Maybe five, but definitely three: delta, mu, and kappa. Nowadays, this was the first receptor system that we ever studied, that we ever discovered in humans or in any animal. Nowadays, they're just labeled 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. But back then, we used Greek letters, delta, mu, and kappa. Most of what we've studied, we know the most about mu, because that's the obvious thing that morphine does. It is a full agonist at the mu receptor, right? When you take a drug, let's say you take morphine, and you're a healthy adult, and you're not used to it, you've never really taken morphine before, that's going to cause a lot of activity in the mu receptor system in a very ancient part in kind of the middle of your brain called the basal ganglia. And this leads to euphoria, and it leads to wanting to do it again, leads to impulsive use. For a few hours, it feels really good for a few hours, but then it starts to wear off, and you start to feel bad. Part of that feeling bad is because of the kappa opioid receptor system. It's kind of like your brain has both a gas and a brake, because you don't want to feel good all the time, because then you're not gonna go find food or escape from prey or predators, I should say. It's not very evolutionarily advantageous if you take morphine once and you're just high forever. So we have our own way to kind of block that. And there are a lot of ways that we block and regulate those effects. One of the things is the kappa opioid system. When you increase activity there, you feel bad. People take synthetic kappa agonists in a research setting, and they were looking like, oh, maybe this would be a good treatment for pain, because kappa agonists, they also reduce pain, but they don't lead to euphoria and compulsive use. Instead of euphoria, they lead to dysphoria, which is what it sounds like. It's kind of the opposite of it. And we see that in salvia. It's a little bit different with salvia, but people refer to one of the subjects I had, they talked about seeing everyone in the room, but as if you're looking through a tunnel, like you're just more distanced from people. It wasn't so much that they were crying, they were just like farther away emotionally. And that is not something that you're looking for when you're trying to patent pain relieving medicine. So no one's been able to make any medicine out of kappa agonist or antagonist drugs. But so you take something like naltrexone or what else here? Buprenorphine, those three. That's a kappa antagonist. So even if you take morphine and you start to feel good, if you have naltrexone first and then you take morphine, it doesn't really work so well. And it helps with the craving as well, because one of the things that the kappa system regulates is things like how you understand pain in your body, not whether you feel it or not so much as kind of your relationship to it. It's been a little while since I've gone through this literature, but so three different kinds of opioid receptors, and we see that kratom in one way, it works kind of like morphine or fentanyl, that it feels good and it reduces pain, and in another way, it kind of works like naltrexone or buprenorphine, where it can help people who don't want to be taking morphine, right? So it's got a little from column A, a little from column B. There's another chemical in kratom leaves called 7-hydroxymitragynine. And it's there anyway, but also mitragynine breaks down into 7-hydroxy. So the older the leaf, the more, the ratio is going to change. And 7-hydroxy is also, so it's a mu partial agonist, it's a kappa antagonist, and then it's got a third property. It's a delta opioid receptor antagonist as well. I don't know much about the delta receptor system. I don't think anyone does. But that naltrexone, also an antagonist at delta. Buprenorphine doesn't seem to affect delta very much. Mitragynine doesn't affect delta. But again, so we have two chemicals. The point here, rather than going too much into a chemistry talk, the point is that we have these two chemicals in this plant that work to cause feeling good, euphoria, compulsive use through the mu opioid receptor, but then through kappa and delta opioids, these same chemicals can limit the euphoria and the craving and the addiction. So it's, like I said, it's a little of this and a little of that, and it's all together in one plant. Maybe, yeah. That's kind of the theory. I think the way that the kappa system interacts with the others and with the reward circuitry in the brain, it's very complex. But that might be part of it. So people use kratom to feel more social and more connected to other people, right? When you take morphine and then 8 hours later, you don't feel very social at all. And so the kappa system is one of many things that might mediate those kinds of effects. There are a lot of other chemicals in kratom, right? There might be 40 different alkaloids. We don't know anything about those other ones. We've looked at, I think, 6 that I've been able to find in English. 6. 2 of them have these opioid properties, and the other 4 don't by themselves. But that leaves another 30 or so chemicals that we don't know anything about. And we don't know anything about how they interact with each other. So we know from cannabis literature, everyone's talking about the Entourage Effect, right? So you have THC and CBD and the ratio between the two, but then you have all these other chemicals and terpenes and flavonoids and all these things. So the overall picture is very different than just reducing it to one chemical. There's been a little bit of work on that. So I found one paper that analyzed the leaves of a plant from Thailand. The Thailand plant has, so most plants, just kind of across the board, a plant is about 1% alkaloids, because then you have things like fiber and chlorophyll. And that stuff's very good for the plant, but fiber, starch, chlorophyll, these things aren't very useful to us as humans. So the first thing you do when you want to investigate this new plant that you just found in the jungle, you extract the alkaloids. So they extracted just the interesting part of the plant from a Thai leaf, and they found of that 1%, 60% of that extract was mitragynine. That's a lot. So 66% of 1% of, a 10-gram dose. And 2% was the 7-hydroxymitragynine. So it's not even, it was the 3rd or 4th most common constituent in that leaf. A different group, different point of time, they took some leaves from a plant in Malaysia. The Malaysian plant, they got this alkaloid extract, and then of that, 12% mitragynine. So it's plant from Thailand, 66%, plant from Malaysia, 12%. Huge difference. The Malaysian plant didn't have any 7-hydroxymitragynine. Maybe it was new. Maybe it was a younger tree. And some of the other ones, some of these, what do they call it? Minor constituents. Some of them were in both plants. Some of them were only in this one or only in that one. So there's a huge range. The people who know this stuff, who can do the math and understand animal models way better than I do, they said in that paper that the amount of 7-hydroxymitragynine that was available in the Thai plant was not enough to be psychoactive or even bioactive. Like, it was such a small amount that it doesn't really matter how useful or potent it is. It's not going to do anything. But that's just that one plant. Other plants have different levels. There's the entourage effect that we don't know anything about. So the outcome here, the takeaway point, is that different plants have different percentages of things. And we know this for cannabis, and we know this for things like wine and coffee and tobacco. Everyone knows that a Cuban cigar is different from a Guatemalan cigar. Coffee, there are people here in Portland who swear they can take a sip of coffee and they know if it was full shade or partial shade and what season that it was grown in, and if it was on the leeward or the windward. And I don't know if that's true, but I don't have that selectivity, but some people say that that's there. And we know even indoor versus outdoor cannabis and the different genetics of it, as well as the environment that it's growing in, they greatly affect things. So when we're talking about a dosage, right, how many grams to have a sedative effect versus stimulant, it's going to vary quite a bit. But you get enough people together, you get 200 people on Arrowwood. The largest study that's been done was over 8,000 people. That was an online survey. So you get enough people, and you can get some averages at least. So, dosage averages. According to the people on Arrowwood, according to Mr. and Mr. Arrowwood, I should say, who analyzed the data, a threshold dose is 3 grams. A common dose is 8.7, we'll call it 9 grams. and then a strong dose is 18 grams. And the strong dose, that's a lot. That's more, yeah. Yeah. One thing you'll notice about Arrowwood reports is that I think that people who go to Arrowwood, they really like Terence McKenna's idea of the heroic dose. So you want to, if you're going to investigate something, you just go full blown into it, jump into the deep end of the pool and take 19 grams of kratom and see what happens. But we've seen from a number of these surveys and some of the other reports that the more you take, it's a very linear relationship. The more you take, the more negative effects you're going to have. The more nausea, vomiting, dizziness, that kind of thing. There's been some reports of fainting and heart murmurs and some pretty scary sounding things. So a light dose, 5 grams, common dose, 9 grams. I've seen some other reports from different places that put it at maybe a little bit lower, that maybe a low stimulating dose is maybe 3 to 5 grams and a sedative dose is going to be 8 to 10. But again, it depends on a lot of different factors. I did some real quick kind of back of the envelope calculations, and they did these juice packets that you use in Malaysia. Each one of those juice packets contains on average 80 milligrams mitragynine. So using some of these figures, maybe that's somewhere around 6 grams of dried leaf is in one of those juice boxes, and people are using those 3 times a day, and that's a severe addiction to take that much 3 or 4 times a day. In summary, so the final point, so that's kind of a general overview of the literature. Didn't touch on the animal research because I think it's limited relatability to human research, but we see that it's got a long history of safe use. It seems to be mostly safe if you use it by itself, and it can be very dangerous in combination or for long periods of time. It's been getting a lot of news lately. A lot of the news has been how it's a deadly narcotic. Right? The FDA put out a report last year claiming 44 deaths in this country related to kratom use. Now, on the one hand, this report is available online, but it's over 100 pages, and it's culled from all these different sources. So a county morgue here, hospital here, doctor's visit over there. A lot of it is handwritten. I'm bad at reading handwriting just in general, but some of this stuff is really bad. Some of it's going to be it's portrait here and then landscape the other way, and there's no consistency as far as putting the demographics on top and then and just kind of the order of things. So it's very unstructured. As a data scientist, it gives me a headache, and I don't know anyone who's systematically gone through and reported on these 100+ pages, but some people have looked it over. Yeah. Yeah, there's more than one thing like that, where someone, if you didn't hear, so one person was shot in the chest, that is how they died. But they had kratom in their system at the time of death during the autopsy, so kratom is listed as a component cause of that death. And that seems unlikely. That seems not really related to me. There are a few where the person died, and then later, after the fact, a family member called the coroner and said, this person was using kratom at the time, can you add that to the report? And so that was added and included in the FDA's list. Most of these, I want to say something like 40 out of 44, I forgot exactly, the people who died have had many drugs in their system, other prescriptions, even alcohol and cannabis, other opioids particularly. So one takeaway here is that combining kratom with other drugs is dangerous. Don't do that. However, even if we are all on our best behavior, it might not be up to you. What really sparked a lot of this bad media was in, I believe, 2009. 9 people died in Europe from a product called Krypton. And Krypton was later found to have kratom and tramadol in it, which is a prescription opioid. And I don't know what the packaging on this product looked like, but it probably did not say kratom plus tramadol. So I'm going to guess that the people who took these pills didn't know what they were taking, and 9 people died. And that's no fault of their own. So what we see here is that combining drugs with kratom is sometimes deadly. And even you do your due diligence, it might not be enough because the dietary supplement industry is poorly regulated. Yeah, a lot of people want to use kratom as a step down, right? But if taking 2 opioids together is dangerous, how do you do that safely? I really can't comment on that. I know that there are a lot of message boards. Reddit has a big community. There's a lot of places where people talk about that, but I couldn't say. Those same message boards also talk about people who say, help, now I'm addicted to kratom, and I want to stop that. But coming off of kratom, by every standard, every story from every country I've come to, it's less bad than coming off of heroin or something like that. But it is not, it's not perfect. There is a known withdrawal syndrome. The handout, that was from really good methodology. I really liked the way they did it. But that was a group in Thailand, and they came up with 20 questions to measure, this is what kratom withdrawal looks like. And you can score 0 to 60. So if anyone is going through kratom withdrawal, you can take the test and you can see how bad it is. So really one of the dangers here is that this is an herbal supplement, and those aren't regulated very well. In 2015, the FDA issued a recall. There were 4 companies in the state of New York, Walmart, Walgreens, GNC, and another one. And they looked at herbal supplements on the shelves, and 4 out of 5 didn't have the herb that they were being sold for. Some of them had nothing but rice powder, or some of them had a little bit, but not enough, not much. One of them, the worst one, Target was the other one. GNC, Target, Walgreens, Walmart. Walmart had ginkgo biloba, and on the package, gluten-free, right? This product had no ginkgo biloba, but it did have wheat. And that's scary. That's really dangerous for someone with celiac. Like, that's not funny. That's really awful. And this is just the dietary supplement industry as a whole. So to say a lot of the bad press is that, oh, kratom, you don't know what's in it, so we should outlaw it. Well, if you outlaw something, then you have no control over. Like, we have a little bit of control over kratom marketing and packaging now, and if you outlaw it, you have 0 control over it. It's also been in the news because some kratom products have salmonella, and that's very unpleasant. So there's been some voluntary and some mandatory recalls of kratom products late last year, early this year, I think. As of this morning, the CDC is aware of 6 salmonella outbreaks in the country. Kratom is number 2 on that list. It's the second worst. As of today, 132 counts of salmonella in kratom products. But you know what's even worse than kratom? What's even more dangerous? Chicken salad. Chicken salad, 265 counts and 1 death. Food, that's not even an herbal supplement. This is a food product, which is well regulated, I think. I used to work in the food service industry a long time ago. It's probably better regulated than herbal supplements, and someone died from chicken salad. So a lot of the bad press is that kratom is deadly because it's used in combination with other drugs, or it's bad because it could have salmonella, or because it's just unregulated and no one knows what's in it. In my opinion, if anyone was asking me, I would say the thing to do is to tax and regulate it like recreational cannabis. then we have independent testing. We know what's in it. If there is an outbreak, then we can stop it at its source before it even gets to the marketplace. And then we could see not just mitragynine and 7-hydroxy, we could start looking at some of the entourage effects. That's what I'd like to see. One last point is that I found, this is just kind of an interesting little thing. This was from mice, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on animal research, but I found that they were looking at how mitragynine might affect alpha-2 adrenoreceptors. Don't ask me to talk more about those. But the idea is that, so here's what they did. They took some mice and they gave them 5-MeO-DMT. Yeah, and that causes a very obvious behavioral effect if you take 5-MeO-DMT. Then they gave the mice kratom, mitragynine, no DMT effect, completely blocked it. Yeah. So they thought, well, mitragynine might have something to do with these alpha-2 or the 5-HT2A receptors, so let's try this. So then they gave the mice yohimbine, and then mitragynine, and then 5-MeO-DMT. And the yohimbine inhibited the mitragynine's inhibiting effect, so that they had the DMT effect again, if you're following me. So there's something in yohimbine, probably alpha-2 adrenoreceptors. The yohimbine blocked whatever it is that mitragynine was doing. Mitragynine, it's doing something that blocks 5-MeO-DMT. So if anyone here is interested at all about tryptamine psychedelics, and perhaps also interested in kratom use, at least in mice, they don't mix well, but not in an unsafe way, just in that the DMT doesn't do anything. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Is that relevant to humans? How do mice versus humans metabolize DMT? I don't know. That's beyond my knowledge. But that's just an interesting little tidbit I found. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wonder the time course. I know. So in the mice, they took mitragynine and then waited a little while. And then, right? So is that going to be a rescue med like naloxone would be or something? I don't know. Yeah. Also, I mean, anytime you take something orally, like kratom tea, you got to wait like a half an hour for it to enter your bloodstream to begin with. As far as I know, it is legal. There are some states, it brings up a good point, some states it is illegal. Some countries, kratom is illegal. Some states within the U.S. Oregon, as far as I know, it's perfectly legal. There was some talk last year about making it a Schedule I substance in Oregon, but I and others spoke out publicly against that, and so far there hasn't been any talk about it this year that I know of, but that's always kind of there in the background. That's it. That's my talk. That's all the notes I have. So.